Hi guys, so today what I'm going to do is review some basics when it comes to the CRQ. So when we do a CRQ, there are always going to be three questions. The first question is always going to be a context question. So with context questions, remember that it could be either historical context or in some instances, it will be geographic context. So with a historic question or historical context, we are answering why is this happening in history? And for a geographic context, we are asking why is this happening here? Like what geographically is happening here? So for document one, we're going to read our question first, explain the historical circumstances that led to the that led to the expansion of the Islamic empires depicted in the map above. Okay, so number one, the first thing I want to identify or highlight for myself is that this is a historical context question. All right, so I need to explain what is happening in history. What do I know about this group of people, the Islamic Empire, that allowed them? Why were they able to expand in this highlighted territory? So the map is titled Expansion of the Islamic Empires, and it's showing me who did what by expansion. So expansion under the Prophet Muhammad, then under the Rashidun Caliphate, and then under the Umayyad Caliphate. So for this question, I need to think back, right? We are reviewing Islam with this CRQ. So we need to think back as to what do we remember as to why the Islamic empires grew as quickly as they did? And what about their way of expanding allowed for this massive expansion? So when I'm looking at this map, what it's supposed to remind me of is what the Muslims were like as leaders. So one of the historical reasons why the Islamic Empire expanded the way they did in this map is because they had a really strong military, right? That really strong military allowed them to conquer large amounts of land. Another reason they were able to do this was that they were quite wealthy because of trade. So, being wealthy due to trade allowed them to support and finance a large military. And then, lastly, the last reason that the Islamic Empire was able to expand the way they did was that they were very tolerant leaders. So, people welcomed their conquest, right? In a lot of these areas, there was lots of chaos. And so when the Muslims came in and offered a relatively peaceful transition, that they would not destroy their homes and they would let them continue to practice their faiths, many people were very accepting of allowing the Muslims to conquer these areas, right? So there are three reasons. The three reasons why there's three reasons for the historical circumstances that led to this expansion. I'm answering the why did this event occur, is that they had a strong military, they were wealthy due to trade, and they were tolerant leaders, which allowed for the expansion of the Islamic Empire. Okay? So document 2 is always going to be a question about the author. So this is a rather large document, so I'm going to scroll down to the bottom first. Our question says, using document 2, explain the audience for what Ibn Battuta writes about his travels in Asia and Africa, right? And so my source line tells me that the person who wrote this is Ibn Battuta travels in Asia and Africa. All right, so what we're looking for is who. When we have an audience question, we are trying to answer who did he write this for? So let's start by reading our source information. It says, the following are excerpts from Ibn Battuta's accounts of his travels from 1325 to 1354. After traveling throughout the Muslim world, Ibn Battuta was instructed by the Sultan of Morocco to record his stories. 20 years after they took place, he dictated his tales to a writer named Ibn Yazi, who wrote them into a travel guide called the Riala. Some scholars believe that some of his Ibn Battuta accounts were made up or based on what he heard from other travels, and that Ibn Yazi filled in some of the gaps in Ibn Battuta's recollections with descriptions from writings of other travelers. Okay, so it says, I left Tangier, my birthplace, on Thursday, 2nd Rajab 725, or the other way of saying the year would be June 14th, 1325, with the intention of making the pilgrimage to the holy house at Mecca and the tomb of the Prophet at Medina, the Hajj. Tripoli. Sometime later, I joined a pilgrim. So the first city he goes to is Tripoli. Sometime later, I joined a pilgrim caravan. Then we set out for Tripoli, accompanied for several stages by 100 or more horsemen, as well as a detachment of archers, out of respect for whom the Arab robbers kept their distance. There was an uninterrupted chain of bazaars from Alexandria to Cairo, and from Cairo to Aswan in Upper Egypt. Cairo. I arrived at length at Cairo, mother of all cities and seat of the pharaoh, the tyrant. It is said that in Cairo there are 12,000 water carriers who transport water on camels, and 30,000 hirers of mules and donkeys, and that on the Nile there are 36,000 boats belonging to the Sultan and his subjects, which sail upstream to Upper Egypt and downstream to Alexandria and Dimite, laden with goods and profitable merchandise of all kinds. The madrasas, or Islamic colleges, of Cairo cannot be counted. As for Martisan, which lies between the two castles, near the mausoleum of the Sultan Qaun, no description is adequate to its beauties. The next city he visited, Damascus. I entered Damascus on Thursday 9th Ramadan 726, or the 9th of August 1326, and lodged at the Malachite College. Damascus surpassed all other cities in beauty, and no description can do justice to its charms. The cathedral mosque, known as the Umayyad Mosque, is the most magnificent mosque in the world. Last city, Mecca. I got rid of my tailored clothes, bathed, and putting on the pilgrim's garments, I prayed and dedicated myself to the pilgrimage. The inhabitants of Mecca have many excellent and noble activities and qualities. They are good to be humble and weak and kind to strangers. When any of them makes feasts, he begins by giving food to the religious devotees who are poor and without resources. So once again, our question is, using document 2, explain the audience. Who did he write this for? So if we look, we know from the source line that he was instructed by the Sultan or the king of his country to write this. And it was called a travel guide. Now, if we look at where he was going, he goes from Tripoli in his birthplace to Cairo to Damascus to Mecca. And then here, when we get to Mecca, we see that he's making the pilgrimage. So if I am thinking about who he intends to read this, who does he want to read this? I would say he wants people who are Muslim and about to make the Hajj to Mecca would be the ones he wants to read this piece of information. Okay. Our third question is always describing the relationship between those two documents. So document 1 was a map. Right? We go back up to it. A map that shows all of the lands that the Muslim Empire conquered. And then document 2 is the description of someone who lived in North Africa and how he was making his Hajj to Mecca. So if we're going to identify our cause and effect relationship, we need to first identify which document is the cause and which document is the effect. So in this instance, first the Muslims conquer all these lands, and then second, people in those conquered lands, because he was born in Tangier, and then the first city he visits is Tripoli. If we look on the map, there's Tangier and there's Tripoli. right? So as the Muslims continued to conquer, they conquered the lands that Ibn Battuta was in. So our answer would be that document 1 is our cause and document 2 is our fact. And now we need to use evidence from the documents to explain that relationship. So in this instance, we would say the map shows where the Islamic empires conquered and expanded. As they continued to conquer and expand, more people converted to their religion, which led to Ibn Battuta becoming Muslim and making the Hajj to Mecca. All right, and now I've used evidence from document 1 and 2 and shown how the information or the event in document 1 caused the event in document 2. Right? Hopefully that helps you in completing your homework.